Hi, my name is Emily, and this is the story of how the man who gave me life also gave me away. I was 6 years old when my father dropped me off at an orphanage with nothing but a worn out backpack and a broken toy elephant. He told me it was just for a little while. I believed him. Days turned into months, months into years, and the only people who came through those doors were there for other children. Never me. I used to sit by the window, hoping he'd pull up in that old rusted truck of his, scoop me into his arms and say he was sorry. That never happened. But something else did. I grew up. I found real love in the most unexpected place. And one day, when I had everything I had ever dreamed of, he came back. But by then, I wasn't that abandoned little girl anymore. I was the woman who had just bought the car of his dreams, and it was my new dad, the one who chose me, who opened the door to meet him. I still remember the smell of that truck, stale cigarettes and motor oil. I was sitting in the passenger seat, legs swinging above the floor, clutching my toy elephant like it could save me. My dad hadn't said much during the ride, just stared out the windshield with a jaw so tight I could see the veins in his neck. We pulled up to a big gray building with a crooked sign that said, St. Mary's Home for Children. I thought we were visiting someone. Instead, he got out, opened my door, and said, "Come on, Em." Inside, a woman with kind eyes greeted us. She crouched to my level and said, "You must be Emily. We're so glad you're here." I looked up at my dad, confused. "Daddy? What is this place?" He avoided my eyes. "They'll take care of you here. I just can't right now." He stood up, gave me one awkward pat on the head, and walked out. No hug, no goodbye. Just the sound of that old truck pulling away, and me, frozen in place with a silent scream stuck in my throat. The staff tried to comfort me, but I was inconsolable. I didn't eat for days. I barely spoke. I kept waiting for the door to swing open and for him to come back. But he never did. Other kids came and went. They were adopted, chosen, wanted. Me, I stayed. Years passed, and the pain dulled, but never disappeared. I started pretending it didn't hurt, started acting tough, independent. But deep down, every time I saw a little girl get picked up by her new family, something inside me cracked a little more. Until the day someone walked in who didn't see a broken kid, but saw me. It was raining the day he showed up. Most people walked fast in the rain, heads down, umbrellas snapping against the wind. But this man moved slowly, deliberately. He wore a dark wool coat soaked at the shoulders and held a small paper bag in one hand. When the staff buzzed him in, I peeked around the corner from the hallway. Something about him made me pause. He wasn't rich. His shoes were scuffed, and his hands looked like they belonged to someone who worked with metal or wood. But his eyes, warm, brown, and kind, searched the room like he was looking for something important. "Mr. Carter?" the receptionist said, extending a hand. "Thank you for coming. We weren't expecting you until next week." He smiled politely. I couldn't wait. My stomach flipped. He wasn't here for me. That's what I told myself. But then he saw me. Not just looked at me, saw me. Like he recognized something he'd been searching for a long time. "You must be Emily," he said gently. I froze. "Do I know you?" "No," he replied. "But I hope to." He started visiting twice a week. At first, I didn't trust him. I'd been visited before, people with smiles too wide and promises too easy. But this man, Thomas Carter, never made big promises. He just sat beside me in the common room, asked how my day was, brought me my favorite snack when he found out I liked dried mango slices. He listened when I talked. He remembered what I said. He didn't try to fix me. He let me be me. One day he brought me a book. Little Women. "One of my daughter's favorites," he said before pausing. "She passed away a few years ago." The air shifted. We didn't talk much that day, but we sat quietly, and it felt like neither of us was alone in our grief anymore. Then one afternoon, he said something that changed my life. "Emily, if you'd like, I'd be honored to become your dad." My throat tightened. For a moment, I couldn't speak. Then, for the first time in years, I cried. Not because I was broken, but because something inside me felt whole again. Moving in with Thomas wasn't like I imagined a new life would be. There was no grand mansion, no glittering fairy tale, but the little house he brought me to had something I'd never felt before: peace. It was modest, a one-story home with creaky floors and mismatched furniture, but it smelled like cinnamon and fresh laundry. The living room had a giant bookshelf filled with old novels and framed pictures of people I'd never met. One in particular stood out: a girl with long dark hair and eyes full of light. "Your daughter?" I asked quietly. He nodded. "Lena, she loved that chair," he said, pointing to a faded armchair by the window. "She'd curl up with a book and get lost for hours." I didn't sit in it, not at first. He gave me the room at the back of the house, painted soft green, with a little window that looked out onto the yard. It wasn't much, but it was mine. The first time I closed the door and lay on that bed, I felt something strange, safe. At dinner, he always asked about my day, not out of obligation. He listened, really listened. And when I struggled with nightmares or flinched when he raised his voice too suddenly, he didn't scold me. He apologized, even if he hadn't meant harm. Slowly, I stopped waiting for the other shoe to drop. We built rituals: Sunday pancakes, movie nights with popcorn, fixing old furniture in the garage. He taught me how to sand wood, how to measure twice, cut once. We talked about everything: my dreams, his regrets, Lena, my real dad. "I don't want to replace anyone," he said one night, "but I want to be someone who stays." And he did. At school, things were different. I wasn't the girl from the group home anymore, but I wasn't fully accepted either. Kids whispered. Some envied my calm, others mocked my quietness. But I didn't crumble, not this time. Because now, I had someone waiting for me at home, someone proud of me, whether I got an A or just made it through the day. And that changed everything. I was 17 when the letter came. It was an ordinary Tuesday. I had just come home from school, dropped my backpack by the door, and kicked off my shoes like always. Thomas was in the kitchen, humming to himself as he stirred something on the stove. That's when I saw it. A plain envelope resting on the counter, with my name written in shaky cursive I hadn't seen in over a decade. I froze. Thomas noticed. "Everything all right?" I didn't answer. My fingers were already trembling as I picked it up and opened it. Inside was a single piece of paper and a small photo. The paper read, "If this finds you, I hope it's not too late. I never stopped thinking about you. I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please, come see me. Dad." The photo was old. Me at 5 years old, sitting on his shoulders, both of us laughing. A photo I didn't even know existed. I didn't know how to feel. This was the man who had dropped me off like a package. The one who said just for a while and never came back. The one who had vanished from every birthday, every school play, every tear-filled night when I begged for answers. And now, out of nowhere, he wanted to talk? Thomas didn't push. He just asked, "Do you want to see him?" I stared at the letter for a long time. "I don't know." That night, I couldn't sleep. My past was knocking on the door I had tried to bolt shut. I thought of the little girl I used to be, waiting by the window every weekend, hoping his car would appear. I thought of the anger that had kept me going, the fire that burned whenever I heard his name. But more than anything, I thought of what I'd become without him. Strong, whole, loved. I didn't need him to be okay anymore, but maybe, just maybe, I needed to hear him say sorry. Not for him, for me. A week after the letter arrived, I made my decision. I didn't dress to impress. No makeup, no fancy clothes. Just jeans, a soft sweater, and the same sneakers I wore when I walked through the worst storms of my life. Thomas offered to drive me, but I asked him to stay. "This is something I have to do alone," I said. He just nodded and gave me a long hug before I left. My biological father, Daniel, lived in a modest house on the edge of the city. Not what I expected, not a mansion, not a shack, just something between. I stood outside his door for 5 minutes before knocking. My heart was pounding in my ears, my breath shallow. A part of me still wanted to turn around and leave, but I didn't. He opened the door. His face had aged, more than I expected. Lines where there used to be youth. A slight tremble in his hands. His eyes, the same hazel shade as mine, widened when he saw me. "Emma," he whispered. I didn't smile. "You said you wanted to see me." He stepped aside, letting me in. The house smelled faintly of old books and black coffee. He led me to a small living room cluttered with photos, none of them with me in them. We sat across from each other. Silence. Then he started to speak. "I made the worst mistake of my life when I let you go." "You didn't let me go," I corrected. "You abandoned me." He looked down. "You're right." For a moment, I thought I'd feel better hearing that. But I didn't. Not yet. "I kept telling myself it was for the best," he continued. "That you'd have a better life in the system than with me scraping pennies. But that was a lie. The truth is, I was scared. Scared of being a bad father. So I ran. I stayed quiet. Let him talk. Let him sit in the mess he made. I followed you online for years," he admitted. "I saw when you graduated, when you got your nursing license. I never had the courage to reach out. Until now." "And why now?" I asked. He hesitated. "Because I'm sick." The words hung in the air like dust caught in sunlight. "I have 6 months, maybe less," he said. "I didn't want to leave this world without looking you in the eyes and saying I'm sorry." That's when the anger cracked. Just a little. I saw him not as the villain from my childhood, but as a man drowning in his own regret. Still, regret doesn't fix what's broken, and apologies don't erase scars. But maybe they make them hurt a little less. "I don't know what you want from me," I said honestly. "Nothing," he replied. "Just forgiveness, even if you never come back." I stood up. "You were wrong. I didn't need you to become who I am." Then I paused. "But maybe the girl I used to be deserves to hear you say it again." He looked up. "I'm sorry." This time I believed him. I left without hugging him, but I walked away lighter. Sometimes closure isn't about fixing the past. It's about knowing you survived it. After that day, I didn't see Daniel again. He wrote once, a short letter thanking me for coming, saying that seeing me gave him peace. I folded it and placed it in a box labeled "What I Lived Through." That chapter of my life felt closed, but what wasn't closed was the story of the man who did show up for me, Thomas. The man who walked into that group home when I was 8, looked me in the eyes and said, "Let's go home." The man who taught me to ride a bike, to tie my shoes, to believe in myself again. The man who drove me to college interviews and cried at my graduation, trying to hide it under sunglasses. So on his birthday, just a few weeks after my meeting with Daniel, I did something I'd been planning for a long time. I bought him the car of his dreams. Not just any car, the one he always talked about when he thought I wasn't listening. A 1967 Mustang, midnight blue, chrome shining like a mirror. He once told me, "When I was young, I dreamed of driving one of those along the coast, just me and the world." I had it restored. Perfect condition. Every detail flawless. It took nearly all the money I'd saved. But to me, it wasn't a cost. It was a thank you. On the morning of his birthday, I led him outside with my hands over his eyes. He laughed. "What are you doing?" "Just trust me," I said. When we got to the driveway, I whispered, "Okay, now look." He opened his eyes. At first, he blinked like he didn't understand what he was seeing. Then he froze. Then, "Emma, what is this?" I handed him the keys. "It's yours, for every ride you gave me when I couldn't walk alone." He shook his head. "This is too much." "No," I said. "It's just enough. For a man who gave a scared little girl a family." He teared up, and so did I. He reached out, pulling me into a hug that said everything we couldn't. That day, we drove down the coast together, just like he dreamed. Roof down, wind in our faces, the world wide open ahead of us. And for the first time in years, I felt completely whole, because sometimes the person who saved you doesn't need to share your blood, just your heart. A few months passed. Life went on, peacefully, quietly. I was working at the hospital again, picking up extra shifts, saving for a trip I'd been dreaming of. Then, one afternoon, a man in a charcoal gray suit showed up at my door. "Miss Carter?" he asked. "Yes?" He extended an envelope. "I'm with the firm of Holloway and Briggs. May I come in?" I nodded slowly, heart already racing. He sat down, opened his briefcase, and placed a small stack of papers on the table. "I represent the estate of Margaret Winslow." The name sent a shiver down my spine. Mrs. Winslow, the quiet, frail woman I'd cared for in hospice for nearly 6 months last year. She barely spoke. No family ever visited. But every time I entered the room, her eyes lit up. She would hold my hand while I read to her, or simply sat beside her. When she passed away, I cried, harder than I expected. It felt like I'd lost someone I never really got to know, and somehow still did. "She left something for me?" I asked. The man nodded. "Everything." I blinked. "I'm sorry. What?" He smiled gently. "Her will was updated shortly before her passing. She left her entire estate to you. That includes properties, accounts, and her share in a publishing company." I stared at him. She said, quote, "Emma Carter gave me the only comfort I had left in this world. I want her to have a new beginning. The one I never got." My chest tightened. I couldn't speak. Then he slid a document across the table. "Estimated value of the estate, $115 million. I thought it was a mistake. I thought maybe this was a prank or a dream, but it was real. And suddenly, my life shifted again. Not because I asked for it, not because I chased it, but because I showed up for someone who needed me. The days after the reading of the will felt like a blur. Lawyers, bank meetings, paperwork, headlines. Yes, headlines. Somehow the story leaked. Young nurse inherits $115 million from mysterious elderly woman. My inbox exploded. Reporters camped outside my apartment. People I hadn't heard from in years suddenly remembered I existed. But none of that mattered to me, because in the quiet moments, in between interviews and signatures, I would sit in the sunroom of the house I used to dream about, one of Mrs. Winslow's homes overlooking the sea, and remember her voice, frail but warm, asking me to read her one more chapter of her favorite novel. I didn't feel rich. I felt responsible. She didn't just leave me her fortune. She left me her trust. So I started small. I paid off my student loans, donated to the hospice center, quietly paid the medical bills of several other patients I remembered from that time. Then I hired a small team, lawyers, advisors, a kind accountant named Ruth, and formed the Winslow Compassion Foundation. Our mission was simple: support and uplift caregivers, nurses, and medical workers who devote their lives to others with little thanks. It didn't feel like revenge or glory. It felt like purpose. And just when I thought I'd finally settled into this new life, someone knocked on my door. I opened it, and there stood my biological father, the man who signed me away. His hair was grayer now, and he looked smaller than I remembered. But the moment our eyes met, I saw it. The regret, the guilt, the need. He didn't say hello. He said, "Emma, I saw the news. I wanted to talk." And for the first time in my life, I wasn't the girl who needed his love. I was the woman who had already found her worth. I didn't move right away. I just stood there in the doorway, staring at the man who had once dropped me off at a foster center with a single garbage bag full of clothes and no explanation. He looked older, yes, worn, but still, my father. "Can I come in?" he asked softly. Part of me wanted to slam the door. Another part, the part shaped by Mrs. Winslow's kindness, told me to listen. I stepped aside. We sat in the parlor. He glanced around, whistling low. "You really live here?" he said. "I mean, this place is unbelievable." "I do," I replied, calm but guarded. He looked at me like he was seeing me for the first time. "You've grown up good," he said. "Better than I deserved. I don't expect you to forgive me, Emma. I just wanted to say I'm sorry." I was young, broke. Your mom was gone. I didn't know what to do. I let the silence stretch. Then I said, "You didn't even leave a note. You just handed me over like I was someone else's problem." He winced. "I know," he said. "It was the biggest mistake of my life. But when I saw the news, when I saw your face, I realized how badly I failed you." I took a deep breath. Then quietly I said, "You didn't fail me. You gave up on me, but someone else didn't." He looked confused, and right on cue, I heard the front door open behind me. "Emma?" came a familiar voice. Steady, warm. I turned to see Mr. Harvey, the man who raised me after the foster home, my real father in every way that mattered. I smiled. My biological father stood, uncertain. Mr. Harvey stepped forward and gently put a hand on my shoulder. "This your guest?" he asked me, eyes never leaving the man in front of him. I nodded once. Mr. Harvey gave the man a firm, respectful nod. "I'm the one who helped her get to where she is, who stayed when you didn't." The message was clear. No yelling, no drama, just truth. My old father looked down at his hands. "I understand," he murmured. And then he turned to me and said the one thing I never thought I'd hear from him. "Thank you for letting me say it." He left without asking for money, without begging for a second chance, and as the door clicked shut behind him, Mr. Harvey turned to me. "You okay?" I nodded. "Better than I've ever been." That night, I sat on the balcony of my apartment. A sweeping view of the city stretched before me, skyscrapers blinking like distant memories. I held a mug of tea in my hands, but it wasn't the warmth from the drink that kept me steady. It was the peace inside me. For years, I thought closure would come with some grand act, a confrontation, a breakdown, a dramatic apology, but instead it came in silence, in the quiet truth that I was no longer broken, that I didn't need revenge. I had already won. Mr. Harvey joined me, 2 mugs of tea now sitting between us. "You did good today," he said gently. I smiled. "It felt strange, like the last page of a chapter." He nodded. "Because it was." I had been living in the shadow of abandonment for so long. But in that moment, the weight lifted. Not because my past had changed, but because I had. The next morning, I made a decision. I visited the community center that helped foster kids. I walked in wearing jeans and a hoodie, no designer bag, no press. Just me. The real me. And I spoke to a group of young girls, told them where I came from, what it felt like to be left behind, and how that wasn't the end, just the beginning. One girl, maybe 11, raised her hand and said, "But what if no one ever picks you?" I looked at her, my voice firm. "Then you pick yourself." The room fell quiet, and I knew that whatever business I was building, whatever empire I was running, this, right here, was the real legacy. Not the money, not the mansion, but the message. You can be unwanted and still be unstoppable. You can be left behind and still lead. You can be forgotten and still become unforgettable. Hi again. My name is Emily. The day my biological father showed up at my door, everything came full circle. He had no idea whose house he was walking into. He didn't recognize the car in the driveway, the one he always dreamed of owning. And he definitely didn't expect the man who opened the door to be the same one who had taken me in when no one else would. He stood there with the same empty eyes I remembered from that orphanage drop-off. He stuttered out my name like he had the right to speak it. But I didn't answer. My real dad, the man who raised me, believed in me, and never once let me feel unloved, stepped forward and said, "She doesn't need you anymore." And he was right. That day, I realized I had everything I ever needed. A father who chose me, a life I built with my own hands, and the peace of knowing I turned my pain into power. So if you're ever told you're not enough, remember this. Sometimes being thrown away is just life's way of clearing the path for something better. Because I may have been left behind, but I never stayed behind.